we will begin just a moment as soon as the record button starts. Okay, we are recording. So let me just kick off and folks can join as needed. I wanted to welcome everyone to the call today. I know folks are still joining at a rapid clip. There's one of my favorites, John Nicholou. Look at that beard. John, it's great to see you and others on the call today. Thanks for joining. Today, we are going to talk about one of Microsoft's core legislative priorities, and that is sustainability. As you know, Microsoft has been working very hard to go carbon neutral, water negative, and Michelle, our featured guest, will correct me on all the terms and terminology. I am not an expert on this. That's why we have experts, subject matter experts like Michelle, to provide this content. So what I would like to do, and as always, we would like to reserve Q&A until the end. And I will moderate the questions. We encourage participation and engagement as always. But I would like to moderate the questions in respect of Michelle's time today. So allow me to ask the questions, but please send your questions in. And for those now joining, we are recording. What I would like to do at 2:04, Mark, let's turn it over to Michelle, one of my great Microsoft colleagues. And Michelle, the content and screen is yours.
David.
Michelle, you were on mute. Here we go.
There we go. A little sticky today. So David, thank you. It really is a pleasure to join you guys today. I mean, VFI is such a critical part of what we do. And so I just really delighted to be able to talk about our sustainability strategy. Before I begin, I'm Michelle Patron. I am Senior Director for Sustainability Policy at Microsoft. So I'm in charge of our energy and our sustainability policy at the federal level, the state level, and I also help out our subsidiaries around the world, really developing our corporate strategy around this and how we should engage on these issues. I've been at Microsoft for about 4 years. Before that, I've worked the last 20 years in energy and climate in the public sector and in the private sector. Immediately before coming to Microsoft, I worked at the White House. I was the Senior Director for Energy and Climate on the National Security Council under President Obama. Before that, I spent 10 years on Wall Street working on the energy commodity side at a bank and also for a private research firm. And then before that, I actually began my career at an environmental NGO, and I worked at the Department of Energy during President Clinton and President Bush's term. So really understanding on the policy space and really over the last 10 years, bringing that to the tech sector. What I want to do today is I want to run through, and I'm going to pull up my slides, want to run through what Microsoft's strategy is. We've been active in this space for a while, but over the last year, we've really doubled down. Just waiting 1 second for it to come up. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Yeah, we see the slide.
We see your full screen.
Great, perfect. So I want to run through our strategy and the different components of it. So, whoops, sorry about that. There we go. Okay. So this year we really, because of what the science is telling us, because of what we're hearing from our customers, from our employees, from our partners, what we're seeing in the public sphere, we know that we have a responsibility to do more. And we really revamped how we are going to approach the issue of the environment and really how we want to position Microsoft to be the leading platform provider of technology solutions in this space. So we are focusing on 4 key environmental areas: carbon, which includes energy, water, waste, and ecosystems. And we're looking at how we can really drive change through 4 critical levers. One is our own operations. 2 is how our products and services can really empower others. 3 is working with our customers and our partners to help them on their sustainability journey and to scale up action. And 4 is through policy. At the core of this is our employees. They really are both those that work in sustainability and those that don't have sustainability as a day job but are committed to it, are really at the core of helping us achieve all of this. So I want to run through right now the operational piece first. So over the course of this past year, we've laid out our game plan, what we're going to do over the next decade, really, in each of these spaces. In carbon, we've announced that we will be carbon negative by 2030. And this is across not just our operations and the emissions from our electricity, but also across both our supply chain and our value chain. So really cradle to grave. In the next slide, I'm going to talk a bit more what that means, but we're going to basically get our own emissions to near zero, our supply chain to 55% reduction, and then we're going to remove the rest. And we are going to keep going until we've removed all the historic emissions that Microsoft has put into the atmosphere since we were founded as a company in the 1970s. Historically, companies maybe have bought offsets, which was a way of maybe avoiding emissions, but that doesn't really help the problem. When carbon goes in the atmosphere, it stays there. So we don't just have to reduce it, we literally have to remove it. And that's where that commitment anchors to. In addition to all the capital that we're going to need to deploy to be able to meet our goals, we've also set aside $1 billion in a climate innovation fund to really help get new technologies from the lab to the market over the next few years. The second area in water is that we're going to be water positive by 2030. We're going to reduce the water intensity that we used per megawatt hour, but we're also going to replenish more than we use, particularly in some of the most water-stressed regions where we operate. We're going to invest in digitization to improve our water data and really find new partnerships to be able to drive resilience and replenishment around the country and around the world. The third area is in waste. We've announced that we're going to be zero waste by 2030, both across our operations, but also with our products and our packaging. A key part of this is what we're doing with the hardware that goes into our data centers, and we're going to increase the reuse of servers and components up to 90% by 2025. In fact, as part of this commitment, we've announced new circularity centers that we're building at some of our regional hubs to be able to do this not just for Microsoft, but for the other data center and providers in the area. And we've also announced a $30 billion circular economy investment through our venture fund. And the last area is in the ecosystem, and that we've committed in the next year to build and deploy a planetary computer, which I'll talk a little bit more detail later in the presentation. On the operational side, we've announced that we're going to protect more land than we use. We currently use about 11,000 acres. It's probably about 3/4 the size of Manhattan. And we've announced a partnership to protect some of that land here in the United States with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And the other part we're going to use it with a partner, the Nature Conservancy, using their last chance ecosystem map to be able to really identify the most critical fragile ecosystems we need to protect today. And on all these areas, we're going to be speaking out on policy issues, and later I'll talk about that in more specifics. Coming back to carbon, we really are rooted in the science and the math. And we think it's fundamental that we are all using the same map when we talk about carbon, because we have to be honest about what's happening, and then we have to devise the strategies to be able to get to it. So for us, this is what our footprint looks like. Scope 1 is really the direct. It's what our bill comes from, the buildings we own, the manufacturing we own, and the cars that we own in our fleet. For us, it tends to be the smallest, but so for other companies, it could be much larger. Then the scope 2 is indirect, and that's the emissions that come from our electricity. And you can see that they're significantly larger than our direct. But the biggest portion is really around our supply chain. So it's the production of purchased materials, what happens once the product goes beyond, through you guys to the customers, and how the product is used. So all of the energy that's used on an Xbox, for example, that's included in our footprint. Contractors, what happens with end of life related to, or circularity related to our products, employee business travel, all of that is scope 3. And that's important for us to know, because that really helps us ground how we're going to go about this. As I mentioned earlier, for our goal by 2030, we are going to get these two pieces, the scope 1 and the scope 2, to near zero. We're going to do that by securing direct purchase power agreements for renewable energy by 100% by 2025. We've committed to electrifying the fleet that we have both at our campuses and also our commuter fleet by 2030, reducing the emissions, the embodied emissions of construction material that are going into our new buildings, our new campus in Seattle, our new campus in Silicon Valley, and other new buildings around the world. So that's what's going to help us really get that scope 1 and scope 2 piece down. But then we need to focus on our scope 3, which is very hard because we don't control our suppliers. In many cases, our suppliers themselves don't know how much emissions they emit and where it's coming from. So our game plan is that this year we have an internal carbon fee. We used to just keep that to our own emissions. We've expanded that to our supply chain. So now there's an emissions fee relevant to whatever product that we're getting. It is not charged to our suppliers. Right now it's charged to the business group, but it is an incentive for them to figure out ways to reduce the emissions associated with their procurement. We've also begun to implement new procurement processes and tools that's going to enable all of our suppliers to reduce their own emissions, and that we want to work with them on having a consistent and accurate reporting so that over time they can have their own science-based targets like Microsoft has put out. We're also working really hard to reduce the carbon footprint of our devices, to reduce the carbon footprint of our own business travel. And what we can't reduce, we're going to remove. We're going to remove through nature-based solutions like forests that can absorb carbon, agricultural practices that can absorb carbon, and over time to more engineered solutions like direct air capture, which literally can suck carbon from the air, and you either put it under the ground or you put it into new products like cement, low carbon cement, or can be used in beverages or other industries. So I want to shift now from the operations piece to some of the products and just give you a flavor of how we're thinking of it. It starts that because we are building our devices with all of these sustainability factors in mind, because we're designing and really building our cloud to be as green as it is, the first stage is really green by default. All our customers receive benefits that are inherent of what's in our products and services. And then the next part of this journey is coming up with new tools that can really help our customers make progress on their sustainability commitments. The first piece of that is managing and measuring carbon, and then building on top of that ways for them to reduce it. And then the last stage is really digitizing these planetary resources. So we're creating new platforms and solutions for different verticals that can really help them, if it's the retailers and being able to create circularity in their fabric and their products. It's financial sectors that are looking for ways to be able to, platforms for them to create new green investment products. So really kind of following along the entire journey here. A few products that are already either available or in preview right now. One is a sustainability calculator, which really shows our customers how they can improve the energy performance, the energy efficiency performance, and really reduce the carbon once they go from an on-prem system to Azure. And really showing them on a regional basis and by different work functions what the carbon benefit from moving to on-prem to Azure is. The second tool is a green SKU that's currently in development, which is really going to help our customers do the things I just talked about, which is measuring their entire emissions from cradle to grave. And so that they can understand, one, what is happening, two, where they need to make the biggest changes. A lot of our customers are also, like probably many of you, are beginning to get questions by your own customers or your own suppliers about your footprint. And so this is going to be valuable data and an efficient way for them to be able to provide that data. Another way that Microsoft products have really been able to accelerate action is through the AI for Earth project. We launched this about 3 years ago, and the program is to provide grants, compute capabilities, and really support, instruction, technical advice on different projects in the agricultural, biodiversity, climate, and water sector, to be able to put AI to work. Really, anyone that has an idea gets a grant. It's been pretty amazing. We have 657 grants now in 95 countries, almost one in every state. And they've been able to make incredible breakthroughs. For example, Sylvia Terra is one of our feature projects. And what they do is they have on-the-ground sensors, which are basically enable them to understand, do a census of every tree in the United States, so they can understand what the carbon sequestration potential is. They can really understand what the biodiversity value is. They're using this data to matching the IoT sensors with satellite imagery to get a better sense of how different local governments can manage some of the wildfire, and where you could put the cordon off to really and help migrate the fire to be able to minimize the loss. So really some exciting and interesting work that is being done. With this group, the organizations range from nonprofits to local governments to academic institutions to startups. Sylvia Terra is a good example of a small startup, and we have them in all of these different areas and all around the world. And that's really what brought us to the idea of building a planetary computer. And this is what we mean. On the one hand, working with conservation organizations, data scientists, app developers, and academic research institutions to really help us and to be, frankly, users and collaborators in creating the data sets. Microsoft providing obviously the cloud infrastructure, helping to really refine these models and eventually develop APIs and apps that can be used for education by citizen scientists, by local governments, by consumers, and by policy and advocacy to make better choices about how we use our natural resources. And there's so many different applications. I mentioned one on the wildfire, but really understanding what's happening with flooding. What are the chances that certain localities will be more exposed to floods, and how do we make better investments? What's happening with different fishing populations? What's happening with urban heat and populations that are most vulnerable? Water wells, how they're failing, or where you have the best chances of infrastructure investments making a difference. So there's so many different ways that this can be used, across sectors and across users. Another way that we're looking to really scale our impact, as I mentioned before, is through this Climate Innovation Fund. And it's $1 billion over the next 4 years. We're about a year into that, so it's 3 years left. It's really to accelerate the development of technology for carbon reduction and removal. And we're looking at two key ways to invest. One is by accelerating development through project and debt finance. And the other is by investing in some of these new technologies directly through equity or debt capital. In terms of how we're looking to make those decisions, we're prioritizing based on the climate impact, where we see underfunded markets, the shared alignment to the business and the commitments I ran through earlier. And another critical piece is climate equity, making sure it's underserved markets and communities also that we'll be able to support. The technologies that we're most interested in are energy systems, those breakthrough technologies on energy storage, on zero carbon power generation and fuels, on energy management. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on the industrial side with carbon capture, zero carbon materials, waste and circularity, and then the resource optimization, forest carbon, sustainable agriculture, and water. Diversity and inclusion is really critical. It's fundamental in this space, both here in the United States and around the world. There's been a lot of focus on the environmental outcomes, but there's not been as much focus on the environmental justice component and making sure that all communities receive the environmental investments and that they're not disproportionately impacted by pollution. And so we're giving a lot of thought to how these investments can be structured, that we do a better job in this area. One that we're particularly excited about is a new portfolio of renewable projects that we just announced with Sol Systems. And this is going to help us reach our 100% renewable energy goal. It's a 500 megawatt portfolio of local solar. We're looking to source in communities across the United States where the businesses are women or minority owned. They're communities that have been historically underserved in this area, and that at least 10% of the proceeds from the projects will get reinvested back into the community for them to do in the ways that they think can be best served by either environmental remediation, skilling of jobs, environmental education, and other resilience investments. This we just announced a month ago, and so we're just getting this kicked off, and we really welcome the opportunity to come back to talk about it once we've been able to do some investments and have lessons learned. Finally, on the policy piece, in each of the areas, there's policy priorities that we'll be using, that we use our voice on. In climate, at a high level, it's policies that help accelerate carbon reduction removal. At the federal and state level, we've been pushing to increase research and development in some of these key emerging carbon technologies, removing barriers once those technologies are able to be deployed. For example, energy storage or some of these exciting distributed energy resources. Until recently, they weren't able to be participate in wholesale electricity markets. And over the last few years, we've been working with a coalition to get rules so that they can participate. That just happened about 2 weeks ago. So we're really excited about that. But those are the kinds of things we've been looking at. At an economy-wide level, we obviously would like to see policies that accelerate carbon reduction. We want to make sure they're done with market mechanisms built in. We're supportive of a carbon price, but we also know that there's other ways to build in those market mechanisms. On the ecosystem side, one of the things that we were engaged in over the last few months was actually a fairly landmark bill called the Great American Outdoors Act, which would permanently fund about $1 billion a year to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That is the fund which the United States uses to acquire land and acquire watershed for protection. And so that was able to get done. It also funded about $10 billion of maintenance at national parks. There's a lot more that has to happen in the ecosystem space. We'd like to see the supporting infrastructure to be able to better manage and monitor along the lines of what we were talking about with what a planetary computer would need to be able to operate. And finally, on the waste and water front, obviously there's a bunch of policies that can help us achieve our own goals. We also think that this is a critical area for infrastructure investment, particularly on the water side, when it comes to access to safe and drinking water. There's nothing more basic than that. So let me leave it there. I know that's a lot that we've gone through. We're really excited. There's a lot of work happening across the company, and we really just look forward to being able to work more with you in this space.
Michelle, thank you. This is a great, in fact, I'm having a little audio problem. Hang on one second. Let me get this device working properly. So Michelle, I love your presentation. I love what you're doing. This is fascinating. We have a lot of Microsoft partners on the call. I want to ask you a question. We have a policy internally where we charge our business units for carbon. Can you explain a bit more of that? Because there's, sometimes we also ask that our vendors and downstream suppliers and perhaps partners also adopt policies that we feel are important to consider. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Microsoft charges business units for carbon use?
Yes. So right now we charge our business units $15 per unit of per metric ton of carbon, and that's based on both what comes out of their buildings, what is for the electricity that they use, and also it's for their business travel. And so every year we'll sit down and we go with what the projected emissions are going to be, and they understand what that cost is going to be, and then they pay it into a fund. That fund is then used to help us make the investments that we need to be able to achieve our goals. One of the big announcements we made in January is that we are now going to be applying that fee to our supply chain. But it's not just going to be, we're not going to our suppliers and we're saying, oh, in addition, you're going to have to pay this or take this off your bill. It's the business group. So the business group that does the procurement has to pay that tax, right? And we are phasing it in. It's not directly 15 right now. We're going to do it over a series of several years. And along with that, what we're asking our suppliers is to track, right? The first thing is calculate your emissions. And we're going to work with you to calculate your emissions. It might be that over time, we're going to ask them to set emissions goals, right? So that's kind of the ways I think we would be working with our, less about do exactly the commitments that we have made, but really the first thing is before we can solve a problem, we need to understand it. And so helping, we're doing this now in the downstream. I don't know what we'll be doing on the upstream piece yet, but if you think of what's coming in, you also have to think about what's going out. The good thing also is that we're not the only ones, right? We're also, a lot of other companies are beginning to ask this of their suppliers. So we're working together with other companies to really create a single platform so our suppliers don't have to do this in lots of different ways, that they have one way of doing it, one accounting method, and that we can all kind of use the same data, and it makes it easier.
Michelle, thank you. And a lot of our partners on the call today are small business owners. I'm sure that, that possible policy may not affect them at the moment, may not affect them at all. It may be geared toward our larger suppliers and our larger partners. And I know a few are on the call today. But I do find it interesting where we believe that some policies, and I think parental leave, we required a few years ago some of our key vendors to adopt our parental leave policies. But that is not just, these policies are not just energy specific. Sometimes when Microsoft really believes in something, we ask our key vendors and larger partners to consider adopting these policies as well. The second question I have is cloud computing. We know that a cloud center is a huge user of energy, and whether it's water or electricity or whatever it is, a lot of our partners sell Azure, or they perhaps operate data centers, and certainly sell cloud services. Can you go through some of the numbers around a data center and just give the folks an idea of what kind of energy a data center consumes?
Absolutely. I think it is important context to realize that when customers are using a data center, right, they're not necessarily, some of them are evergreen, but a lot of them are going from their own on-premises facilities to a data center. So inherent in that transition is a tremendous amount of efficiency gain, right? We think that there's about a 98% improvement in energy efficiency when you go from on-premises servers to a hyperscale data center like Microsoft. In addition, we think there's about a 93% improvement in a reduction in carbon, right, associated just with that energy use when you're going to a data center. For Microsoft, obviously, we're on this goal to be 100% renewable energy. And we're not just looking at the electricity that we're pulling from the grid, but we are also looking at what we do behind the meter. So we have to run 24/7. For every megawatt that we pull from the grid, we have to have a megawatt of backup. Traditionally, those were diesel gensets, right? You'd have a standby battery, then it would go to a diesel generator. Obviously, that's not great for the environment. And so we've been shifting over time to natural gas. Still, that's not the best solution for the environment. What we really need is zero carbon. So we've actually been investing a tremendous amount in energy storage and in hydrogen and in even, some of these sustainable fuels, drop-in fuels that are like liquid, but they're much more renewable, getting to 100% renewable synthetic fuels, and trying them out to see what we can do. I mean, a company like Microsoft, we probably consume as much electricity as a small medium state, right? It's significant, and it's growing, and so we want to make sure that footprint is zero carbon as we're growing. These data centers, some of them are very small, some of them are the size, create as much or use as much electricity as a really big power plant. And if you think about 100 megawatts or 200 megawatts of backup generators, that's what we have. So when we're thinking about in a single plant, so when we're thinking about these investments, I mean, for example, in Boynton in Southern Virginia for a data center there, we have this exciting pilot on storage, not just because we need it to store for us, but if we're going to be investing with all of those storage batteries there, when we're not using it, maybe we can help the local community. Maybe we can help the local grid. So we have actually a pilot right now working with the local co-op, the rural co-op that's down there, and with the regional grid to be able to do three things. One, to provide some of the battery for us that we never use because we want to make sure it's always available to us. The two is to provide frequency regulation so that the grid is stable. And that, it's an important service that otherwise would need to be provided somewhere else and with other electricity. And the third is to actually sell electricity back to the grid. So we're really excited about, one, turning our kind of demand into this really new type of interaction with the grid that can support it in so many ways, but make sure that it's doing it in a zero carbon way.
Michelle, I always learn so much from your presentations and just our hallway conversations, which haven't happened recently. But I know we have a lot of, you mentioned the grid, and this prompted me to ask about some of our wind initiatives that I know are taking place in mostly Western states, if I'm not mistaken. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, we have a number of projects. So when we kind of are procuring renewable energy projects, we want to make sure that they're additional. They're projects that wouldn't have happened without Microsoft's investment. And so as a result, we've probably brought somewhere between, it might be up to 20, but at least like 13 to 15 new projects on board in the last, 5 years. And a lot of them are in the regional grids where we operate. We have some significant wind projects in Wyoming and in Kansas, which is right on the part of Kansas that is on the grid with Wyoming. We have a wind project in Illinois. We have both wind and solar in Texas. We have a new big solar project coming online in Arizona. We have several solar projects in Virginia. We have a number of wind and solar projects in Ohio and Pennsylvania. So really across the region, and there's a lot more that's in the pipeline. So it's been really exciting to see that, obviously we're bringing these new projects online. They're creating jobs in these areas. They're creating expanding the tax base in these areas. And frankly, they're creating support in places that you wouldn't think would be, natural champions for renewable energy or climate action, because they see it through an economic lens. And so many of these counties and, rural counties, or they might be red counties or red states, they are very excited to talk to us about economic investment and energy investment in renewables. So it's been, and they're excited about the innovation that's happening in data centers.
Michelle, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you have a beautiful polished slide deck and you go through these wonderful stats and initiatives, but what is the real business incentive for Microsoft to pour all this money, create this investment fund, and do all this? What is the business incentive for Microsoft to just dive in to this sustainability effort?
Yeah, so I think it's on several levels. The first is that, we're building a transcontinental infrastructure. We're building out a massive, massive infrastructure of, data centers, of energy, of telecommunications line that is going to last for many decades. And we need to make sure that it is as sustainable and resilient as possible. And I think that is kind of, priority one. I think the other thing is we see where the public is. We see where our customers are. I mean, so much of this, and our employees, and so much of this is we hear about it in our client meetings, in our customer meetings. They're asking for data. They're asking for solutions, and so we just think that this is where the world is going. This is where the market is going. We've never shied away from big opportunities. And so, there's Microsoft, right? We've never seen a problem we don't want to solve. And so, or a big problem we don't want to solve. And so I think this is just tapping it. And employees, I mean, our employees are so passionate about this. They want to make sure that their companies match their values. They also want to be at a company contributing to the solution. And aside from like the team, I don't know, we're something like 100 or 200 that work on this every day. We have a worldwide community of tens of thousands of employees that are exchanging ideas, and both work ideas, but outside of work ideas. And it's been really amazing to see, like with our hackathons and just all of the different engagement that's happening. So I think we have to be here if we're gonna be competitive for the next few decades. This is what we got to do.
Well, listen, you and I have also talked politics on a number of levels. I'm not trying to inject any partisan politics. VFI is nonpartisan, but I do know that, there's an election coming up, and these folks on the call are my fellow political junkies. We follow these things. Do you foresee, let's suppose that we have a new administration in January. Will that shift Microsoft's policy priorities on sustainability?
So look, our priorities are set, and they've already kind of risen to the top of the company. So our priorities, even our policy priorities that I laid out on research and development and removing barriers and accelerated carbon removal and really reduction, carbon pricing, market mechanisms, those are our priorities. I think what changes in different outcomes is where are the opportunities to engage and how do you engage? We've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years talking with a lot of offices. I mean, there is definitely interest on both sides to figure out solutions. Whether or not what that appetite is probably changes in different political climates. And then I think for us, it's that we've been focusing a lot at the state level recently. Is there more opportunity at the federal level, or are we staying steady at the state level? So I think it's just what the venue and the opportunity is. Obviously, the different candidates have different positions on this, but I think overall these longer trends that I talked about this is where the public is going, the economic case, that narrative doesn't change, and we've even seen that on both sides of the aisle, at least in private conversations.
And Michelle, this is not a political question. I'm not seeking to address climate change whatsoever. I would like to just, because it has been top of the news for wildfires, most certainly in the West. We have an initiative, you mentioned this in your slides, AI for Earth. Are we doing anything to assist or provide data, or what are we doing to address or to help address, say, the wildfire situation in the West?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really been through our AI for Earth partners that they've been able to leverage Azure and Microsoft AI to really develop these monitoring tools and predictive tools to be able to understand what is happening. And so they're sometimes we're able to connect them with local government agencies, or even with the USDA or the Interior Department, to really demonstrate the power of these tools and what something at scale could look like. And it's really just been that partnership. But we're just happy to be able to support all of these tremendous organizations that are doing that work. But it comes down to being able to measure, monitor, and manage. And it's on everything. It's on the the wildfires. It's on what's some of the depletion of these really critical species that we're seeing. It's on hurricanes and monitoring what's happening on the coasts. There's the extreme just weather, being able to predict. And going back to your other question, I actually see a lot of opportunities regardless of who's in the White House or where Congress is. When it comes to data and understanding what is happening, I think there's a huge appetite. It's when it becomes connected to climate change and action is where you have a lot more friction about what the right way to do it is and what pace and what scale.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And we have one question or a request actually from our good friend John Nicholou in the great state of Chicago. It would be great to get the source or slide info for the reduction in energy and CO2 when a client moves from on-prem to Azure in a Microsoft data center. A lot of these folks are selling cloud services, selling Azure. So these types of things could be helpful, Michelle. Just you and I can get that to John at a later time.
And the other thing I'll say was that sustainability calculator is a tool that you can use. So you basically can set the different hypothetical settings of where the customer is, what kind of data center or server system they have now, and what they're going to be moving to, and their region. And then it's really, in a sense, kind of generically customized to be able to demonstrate what the savings are to them.
VFI, as you know, Michelle, is engagement based. These folks are always asking what they can do from their end to get more involved, get more engaged with their communities, with Microsoft, etc. What, we talked right before the call about a potential call to action for this group. And I know this has been more educational. I know that you are tracking some legislation, but what would you tell our friends on the call today that they can look forward to as with respect to potential legislation or just calls to action in this space?
Absolutely, and that's always dangerous to tell me that that there's a community.
I know, but it's okay. Go ahead.
Because I always take advantage of it. So I think of this as a marker. Obviously, there are two very different scenarios that we will see when it comes to this space in the coming year. And so I think that we're trying to figure out exactly how we're going to organize around that and what are going to be our top priorities and campaigns. And so we will definitely come back with some specifics, both at the federal and the state level of things that we're trying to mobilize around. And then I would just say more broadly, went through a lot of different pieces. If there's anything that resonates, I mean, yes, we're focused on the policy. We're also focused on our broader ecosystem. So if there's a way for us to really to accelerate action through our vendors on some of this, please let us know if it's on the carbon piece, if it's on the water piece, if it's on the waste piece. How can we really kind of leverage action? Because, policy is really critical to this, but also so many private actors taking action is as well.
This is crazy, Michelle, but I told the group I learned a lot from you, but I am learning more about my members every single day. Ryan Risley, one of our super VFI contributors, just chatted to me and said, most of you do not know, but I am an environmental chemist by education. Now, some of you, but not all of you know, Ryan is also an Eagle Scout, which I just hold in the highest regard. But he is very excited about how holistic this approach is to set the standard for other organizations, and continuing to bring these statistics to the fore is very important to the cause. So Ryan is always happy to help. He is an environmental chemist that we now know. So we will be calling on Ryan to lead our sustainability task force at VFI. We will work closely with him. Thank you, Ryan. We love it. We love it. So listen, I have one final question for Michelle. This goes back to my question. What can partners potentially expect? What might be the ask of partners as Microsoft goes through these great efforts and initiatives? Will partners be impacted? Will they be asked to do something? Do they have to sign a carbon neutral pledge? I mean, can you go through some of that? I know this is a tough question, but I'm putting it to you because I'll get the same question from my partners.
So I'm having a sticky microphone. Hopefully that works now. We're working our way through this. You know, I would actually kind of turn it back to all of you is what do you think would help the most? And what fits in best with your companies and your organizations? I mean, I really think, you know, what's in Microsoft's DNA is really data. And that's where I come back to the measuring and understanding your footprint, and figuring out the best way to track it, and making sure we're all using the same methodology. And then, you know, an area we haven't really talked about that much, but we're seeing a lot of interest from our both corporate, but probably also our retail customers, is that they want to have this information, right? How do we communicate it in a very, you know, concise and easy way, and a relevant way? And so I think look, there's probably going to be a lot of more opportunities to sign on to all the different commitments that Microsoft has made. You know, we work with our ecosystem, so we're not going to force anything on anyone. We're going to want to journey together. But, you know, if there are things that really either resonate, that would be the best approach for us to take if we do begin to expand this to our vendors and our partners. You know, this is collaborative.
Michelle, I want to thank you for your time today, your expertise. You're a great colleague to work with. You have a great portfolio. I think it's something that will become one of Microsoft's top legislative priorities. It's, as you know, already rising up the stack, and you have been a great person to work with. And I hope we get to work with you more often through our VFI members and community. These are folks that do like to dig in, and we have environmental chemists now on board, and others that are willing to help. I think I'm going to cut it off there if I could. I don't like to go over time on our webinars, but I do want to thank everyone for joining. I want to thank Michelle, and of course, I want to thank the VFI team for helping put this together. Having said that, this recording will be available on the website. I believe we will post it on LinkedIn, and you can reach out to me and perhaps Michelle directly if you have more questions. But thank you for all of this. Thank you, Sally, Ryan, John, all the ATF members that have joined this call. You guys do awesome work, and we appreciate it. And with that, I just want to say thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.